The fall 2025 season of Investigation with Dr. T is proudly centering on our institution's newly designated prestigious R1 Carnegie classification. We're seizing this moment to go deeper, think bigger, and highlight the game-changing work that's happening. So each episode this fall is going to spotlight cutting-edge research initiatives, groundbreaking studies, and powerful doctoral dissertations led by PhD and EDD students, research-engaged faculty, field-based research practitioners, and community partners. So we're going to focus on vital sectors like education, criminal justice, human services, while also welcoming special guests from the College of Psychology, College of Dental Medicine, and the College of Computing and Engineering. And join us as we celebrate our journey into R1 territory and explore what it truly means to lead with research, lead with scholarship, and lead with purpose. So stay tuned. Fall 2025 Investigation with Dr. T. It's going to be unforgettable. So tonight, my guests are Dr. Abigail Tucker, Jonathon Aroni, and Dr. Christine DePre. Dr. Abigail Tucker is a licensed psychologist in Denver, Colorado, board certified in police and public safety with the American Board of Professional Psychology. She's an adjunct faculty member at Colorado State University, Global, and our very own NSU. Dr. Tucker is a national training instructor for the active bystandership for law enforcement. Jonathon Aroni, a partner at Shepard Mullen. Jonathon is a nationally recognized leader in police reform and law enforcement oversight. He serves as the current federal monitor over the New Orleans Police Department consent decree and brings deep expertise in systems change and policy oversight. And last but not least, Dr. Christine DePre is a passionate advocate, educator, and survivor with over 12 years of experience in victim services and criminal justice. And she currently serves as the anti-trafficking supervisor for One More Child in Circuit 18, where she leads a dedicated team providing trauma-informed advocacy and support to survivors across Central Florida. She holds a doctorate in criminal justice from where? One of the best R1 designated institutions, Nova Southeastern University, and she got her PhD in CJ with us in the School of Criminal Justice, with research focused on how first responding law enforcement officers' interactions with sexual assault survivors impact their healing and cooperation throughout the justice process. And that's what we're going to hear about from her tonight. And I'd like to ask my guests to please come on and welcome to Investigation with Dr. T. I'm your host, Dr. Grace Telesco, and we are going to take a deep dive into these two critical and timely areas in the field of criminal justice and policing. First, we're going to explore active bystandership and current trends in policing. As I said, we have two nationally recognized leaders in this space, and I'm so thrilled to have you both and feel really, really grateful and excited about what we're going to hear tonight. And Chrissy will be back with you after that first segment. And so we appreciate that you're going to come on and you're going to tell us all about your research. Meanwhile, we're going to go right to Dr. Abigail Tucker, Jonathon Aroni, and I'm going to ask you guys, if you don't mind, what is active bystandership? If you can explain the program to us a little bit, and then you can each go into a little bit of detail about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. It's the perfect platform to launch into why this is so important. Active bystandership, quite frankly, is the skill behind the duty to intervene. For those of us that are, whether you're criminal justice, public safety, psychologists working in this space, other health professionals, we've certainly been watching a shift in the law enforcement culture and frankly, the broader public safety and criminal justice culture in the last several years of more transparency. One of the things that I'm really proud to be a part of is active bystandership for law enforcement, otherwise known as the ABLE program, because it addresses the need to help support our public safety workforce with the skills they need so they're legally, morally, ethically required to intervene. But we know from social psychology that intervening is a heck of a lot easier said than done. There's actually a ton of research and example that shows that we're not necessarily born interveners, but we can be taught. They're the skills behind. So active bystandership is the skill behind intervening. And the ABLE program, again, that's active bystandership for law enforcement. The ABLE program is really all about giving a training that gives officers the skills to intervene and then giving that as a runway for an agency to adopt the culture of an active bystander culture. The goal of the training, of course, is to reduce mistakes, prevent misconduct, and promote health and wellness of each other. But the goal of the program is to develop an active bystandership culture that is proactive as well as protective. But I'd actually love to ping it over to Jonathon here because really the roots of active bystandership are embedded in the New Orleans Police Department, and Jonathon, quite frankly, is really the OG of the active bystandership program, starting in New Orleans PD. And if I'm remembering correctly, Jonathon, when they originally created it, it was called EPIC, Ethical Policing is Courageous. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you do, although we sometimes say ethical policing is contagious for very good reasons. But yes, you are right. Ethical policing is courageous.
Yeah. And remind me, well, I wanted to share with folks about kind of how you went from federal monitor to helping develop a program or being part of the movement that brought together the program that was EPIC and is now nationally known as ABLE.
Sure, and it is a little bit of an overstatement to say that I'm the OG. Actually, Irvin Staub is the actual OG.
Sure.
You and I and many others follow in his footsteps. So in New Orleans, the department was looking for a way to make real, deep cultural change. The community was looking for a way to drive cultural change, and I still remember the day they came to me and asked if I would help. And they said, "Would you help create a peer intervention program?" They called it back then. Well, I didn't know what that was, but I say yes to everything. And that I was taken by the fact that the officers and the community wanted the same thing. They both wanted to teach the skills of how to intervene. And that's really how it started in New Orleans. We created EPIC, the community working hand in hand with the police. The reason it worked is because it was good for everyone. Way too many programs failed because the community likes it and the police don't, or the police like it and the community don't. This is upside for everybody. And it worked. And then, years later it became ABLE, and it's in 420 agencies, including NYPD, Grace. And then that subsequently became Heroes, which Abigail runs, and it's just quite a privilege to be part of something that everyone thinks they do, but they don't.
Yeah, that's really the key that we talk a lot about in the training and then elevate that to the leaders in the program is that what we want to get away from is this siloed approach of us versus them. And we want to get away also from this finger pointing, shaming, blaming, and naming, right? Well, you're a bad person because you didn't intervene or you did this thing. But active bystandership is really about how do we leverage the common good and the commonality in all of us with skills to move us from a place of, I see something that's not okay. I'm not sure what to do about it. Move from there to having the skills in order to be able to take action.
It's also, and something Abigail said before is critical here. For years, like, first of all, everyone thinks they do this, everyone thinks they've taught it before, but there is a marked difference between the duty to intervene and the skill of intervening. Like, that is a critical distinction. Everyone is focused on the duty to intervene, which doesn't help anybody. We all kind of know the moral imperative. But without the skills, we're all left to kind of wander in this wilderness of knowing what we should do, but not how we should do it. And that's where ABLE and Heroes and active bystandership generally really deviates from what had been done for years prior. We focus on the skills of how to do this and frankly how to accept it.
Jonathon, I don't know if you know this or not, and this is the off script part that I
I
said
love this
I was
part.
going to do, right? And Abby, I mean, you certainly, let me bring you back in too, because this is a conversation. So back at Hurricane Katrina, I had already retired from NYPD. I was very much active in helping the families post 9/11, and I was down there at Ground Zero for about a year and a half, and then I had retired in 2003, and then I got this phone call from the Department of Human Services. That I still had the same phone number, which I still do have, my 917 New York number. And I got this call asking me if I would be willing to be deployed as part of a DTAC, Disaster Technical Assistance team, to New Orleans. And it
Yeah.
was specifically to debrief and do critical incident stress debriefing for the New Orleans Police Department. And I was the only one of the team that was law enforcement. And I really thought, I walked in there thinking that they would get it, or that they would feel trust, or that they would feel safe with me, because I had been there, done that. But of course, as we know, every incident is unique, and they didn't really want to talk to me in a formal setting. Okay, they didn't want to talk in a formal setting at all. So I have them in a group. I'm the facilitator. I'm doing the debriefing, not opening up, right? Group is over. We're in the hallway, and actually, they were all housed on the Carnival cruise ships. Had Carnival, I think, had donated the cruise ships because almost all of the New Orleans police were they had to evacuate. They weren't able to go back to their homes, and so they needed housing, and Carnival provided that for them. So in the hallway, like waiting for an elevator, I've got a group of guys around me, and they're all opening up, and they're all talking to me informally, right? So when I heard about New Orleans, and they've had their share of issues,
I've heard.
300 left their post that day. And there's no judgment in that at all. I don't know what I would have done if my family needed, it was life and death situation for them. I know that two officers also had committed suicide. So there's been a lot of trauma in that department. And so when I heard that you were really assisting them, I was really curious to hear your take on what's happening there for them now, and is healing and is transformation happening?
Oh, there's a lot there. So long as we have 2 hours for me to answer that, I am good to go. So there's a lot happening there. First of all, the New Orleans Police Department is a changed organization. Um, just like any organization in any industry, they're not perfect, but they are uh, nothing like the NOPD of 2011. The change has been just remarkable.
That's
And
great.
in fact, the judge has announced that they are going to be let out of the consent decree next month. So this is
Bravo.
a major sign that they did it. A couple of just quick observations, and I'll turn it to Abigail based on what you said. First of all, when the community hears about active bystandership, their mind goes to excessive use of force type cases, right? George Floyd type cases. But note, when Abigail described it, she talked about the three pillars, right? Preventing mistakes, or reducing mistakes, preventing misconduct, and promoting officer health and wellness. All three are equal. All three are equally important. And what I have seen with my own eyes down there is the the active bystandership skills are used very effectively in all three of those areas. Right? We as humans have a hard time intervening on someone going through a mental health crisis, even if they're our good friends. And what we know from the research is the same tools that can help me say to Abigail, hey, don't do what you're about to do, can also help me say to Abigail, let's talk. So that's my first observation. Second observation is your experience about what happened between your classes is precisely the experience we not only know in Able, but we build it into the curriculum. We say that as much of the teaching is done between classes as in classes. And everyone who teaches it, and I know it's the same with Heroes, everyone that teaches this is very attentive to that fact. And the third quick observation, which I think is really important, is we're talking about active bystandership in the context of policing. I want to be very clear. There is no industry, no profession, no walk of life that does not need this same skill. The the clergy, the clergy needs this skill. Corporations need this skill. It just so happens we're talking about it in policing. Everyone would benefit. And if anyone says they already do this, can I say that? I call BS. So there you have it.
Awesome. Abby, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I love that there's a question that says, I'm writing an assignment about this, about Able and Epic. And if you're my student, then I know why, but this makes me so excited because I want more students understanding about active bystandership. It's hugely important. The second thing I want to say is I want to bring a little bit of like two sides of research on this. So the first side is the foundational social psychology about why this training works. And both of you are actually talking about one of the things we know is called pluralistic ignorance. And we know from Darley and Latané's research back in the 60s that when you add, the more people you add to any given setting, the less likely you are to intervene. This is humans. It applies to cops. It applies to all of us. So in the debriefing that you're talking about, Dr. Telesco, Jonathan, what you're talking about, what you saw in New Orleans, the more people we add, the less likely people are to intervene. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is that classic, somebody else is going to do it. That's diffusion of responsibility. But I think that the real one, and I hear this in those break chats and the lunch chats and whatever, is the second one called pluralistic ignorance. And that one really is about, nobody else is saying or doing anything. So I guess this is just how we do it, right?
Yes.
I guess we just, Dr. Telesco, in your example, I guess we just stay silent. That's what we do here. Or I guess we're okay with this behavior if it's misconduct, because nobody else is doing anything. And it's amazing how when we break down the social psychology, the research, I love that, research is power. These light bulbs come off, and then we have officers give us the examples where this happened, and then we give them skills so that they can intervene on that to make sure that they can bust through it. But the micro movements are so important, and one of the agencies that we're working with right now, Anne Arundel County Detention Facility in Maryland, they're amazing, and they're adopting active bystandership. And in the first year, what they saw was more peer-to-peer interventions, reducing mistakes, making referrals to EAP, making referrals to peer support. And when I checked in with the leader at year one, now where do they want to go? How do I intervene with hierarchy? How do we intervene with those higher ones? We got to make the small sustainable changes so that we can do the hard things when it matters. And the last thing I guess I want to say is that I'll pop this into the chat here in a second. But the Georgetown Law School, where Abel lives in his house, they did some recent research that I'll put into the chat here, and it was really talking about they're doing more research as we speak, and the goal is really, how is this impacting, right? One of the things that we know right away from their research is it is changing knowledge and perceptions, and now the work is ahead of us to really see how does it influence culture. So it's the prevention paradox, which can be really tough to research for people who understand that concept, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. And kudos to CNA and Cassandra and all the folks at Georgetown Law and CNA as well, who are partnering to dig in and research that.
Okay. Can I add one point, Grace?
Of course, please. Please.
There's another unintended positive consequence that we've seen in New Orleans. So remember, as Abigail said, the New Orleans program was called EPIC. It was the predecessor of ABLE. And what we found was we had officers who would quote EPIC themselves. Active bystandership is about intervening on someone else. But what we found was after the officers understood the inhibitors to intervention and understood that you could actually overcome them, we had officers come to us and say, I almost did X and I had to epic myself. And the fact that that became in New Orleans part of the regular vocabulary
Wow.
was the very early signs of a culture change.
Wow. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So look, I have a question, a follow-up for both of you. And I don't know which one wants to talk about it, but in what ways do officers' perceptions of personal and team safety influence their willingness to intervene as active bystanders, and how can training address these perceptions?
I'll go for it, Jonathan, and then you can
Sure.
put a bow on it. But there's two things I think to keep in mind. So one of the things that we talk about in the training, we talk about personal safety. Most officers are pretty familiar with the phrase like code black, right? But it means this phase when you're in sensory exclusion, you are fight, flight, or freeze, right? You are tunnel vision in because there's a safety issue, maybe for all sorts of reasons, right? There could be a million reasons. Officer involved shooting, maybe it's a traumatic case, XYZ, etc. And one of the things that we talk about is that when they are in weapons training, they train and practice so that they fall back to their skills even in that heightened state, right? So yes, you learn the basic skills and then you train and practice in a heightened state so that that perception of safety, because ultimately in fight, flight, or freeze, right, our perception of safety is threatened, that they can still act. And we do the same thing in active bystandership. So the role plays at the end escalate to become harder and harder and harder. And the goal for that is, yeah, we want you to start with small stuff, but if day one you walk out and we know that you're observing misconduct, how do you make sure that your sense of safety has been trained, right? So training under pressure, training under escalating or more challenging role plays. And that also really, really requires departments to stay in and support their officers in getting the annual training, because we know that these are perishable skills. And I think the other one is the perceptions. I think how I heard is sort of that perception of others, right? I want to be part of this group, right? That officer perception of how do we make sure that we're a collective or a cohesive. And one of the things I guess that I really love to watch transformation happen when I teach active bystandership is officers say, for me, what's been pivotal is shifting my perspective of loyalty from blind loyalty to constructive loyalty. Like, I want you to go home at the end of the day. I may not be okay with how you're acting right now and your behaviors, but at the end of the day, I still want you to go home. You got a family, and we have the integrity of our agency to protect. So how do I intervene on that?
And I mean, and I think also being a law enforcement officer, for 20 years in New York, there were so many times when I would, and I love what you said about how the research sort of supports this, like that the more people that are on the scene, the less likely I am to intervene.
Yes.
And for a variety of reasons. And I mean, I remember as a young rookie, being at the scene of something where my inner voice was saying, "You need to say something. You need to stop this." No one was being injured, but
Right.
clearly officers had stepped over the line, and I knew in my soul that there was something wrong with this. Even though I was a rookie, I knew, but I
Right.
couldn't. I had no voice, and so I think that this is really awesome that you're teaching and you're raising awareness that perceptions can be kind of like focused in such a way of, hey, not only do I want you to be safe and go home, but I don't want you to get indicted either,
Yeah.
You, you,
right?
you know
So,
what's really interesting about this is there are so many misperceptions about policing and among police officers, right? Police officers don't wear seatbelts because they have a misperception that they're going to need to run out of their car at any moment to prevent harm to themselves. And yet, officers continually get injured and died for lack of wearing a seatbelt, right? So there's tons of misperceptions. One of the misperceptions, one of many, is that active bystandership will put me at risk because I might be in the middle of something that's critical and your intervening could create greater risk. Utter misperception, but no different than the seatbelt misperception. So, in actuality, the truth is, active bystandership is every bit as much about saving officers' lives as it is preventing harm to the community. And in fact, one of our three able case studies, the one that every student knows, is a true story where a great officer was killed because someone didn't search a suspect, and the multiple officers who watched that mistake, no one corrected the senior sergeant. And a bad guy ended up in a car with a gun, halfway to jail, took out the gun, shot the officer driving the car. One of our biggest hurdles in active bystandership, like in any corporate culture change, by the way, is overcoming misperceptions.
And speaking of perceptions, you've got the community misperception is also, a variable here. So how might widespread adoption of a bystander intervention program or practice reshape community trust, accountability, legitimacy in policing, and change those community perceptions?
That's a great question. Um, First of all, the program is just for officers. It's not for community members. Community members would benefit from it as well, but not the same training and not together. I want to be very clear about that. A big part of this is the open and frank and honest discussions that take place that would not take place if officers trained with community members. But what the smart agencies do is they make it very clear to the community what they are doing, right? They proudly trumpet that they are learning this skill just like they learn any other skill. For example, when the Denver Police Department embraced ABLE right at the beginning of the program, they asked me to come out and do an interview on their public media station to explain to the public why this was a big deal. When the chief of the DC Police Department embraced ABLE, a guy named Conti, very good chief, very smart guy. He he asked me to interview him on public TV so every officer could see him answer questions about how he wished he had this when he was young, right? So I think, Grace, what I'm saying is the community the trust will increase if they see the department doing this, being honest and open about it, and then they'll start to realize that policing's not unique. Everybody has trouble with this, and everyone could benefit from this skill.
Excellent. Abby, I know you want to weigh in on this question.
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that most individuals in the community who I get the chance to talk to, and I think some of you know, right? The reason I even fell into this work is because when I started out at Nova, Dr. Vincent Van Hasselt was my mentor, a police officer and a psychologist. I then went on and in my internship at Community Center was working with folks who were in jail. And when you get the opportunity to work with individuals who are mentally ill, struggling with substance use, and they're in jail, you get a whole new perspective about what's happening in the community and what lands in the jail. And so through those interactions, I think about the number of families and people I spoke with and what they really want. And they'll say this in different ways is, I want the police to police the police. I want them to figure it out, right? Like I want you all to take care of each other so that I don't have to worry about it as a community member, right? And I think that's a fair ask. And I think that what the ABLE program does is create a solution and a skills and a way to do it that's not just beat over the head, because we have decades of other research to say that punishment and admonishment and blaming and shaming and naming people doesn't change their behavior, right? Maybe in the immediate they get better because they don't want to get in any more trouble, but it doesn't actually change the thinking and the heart and the behavior. And what ABLE does is, we are not here to tell you you're a terrible officer and you've been doing everything wrong. We're here to give you the skills that you were never given. You were given this duty and this responsibility, and you were never given the skills. Now we're going to give you the skills. And leaders, how do you take it in the way that the Denver police chief did, just as Jonathon is describing, and say, we're going to create a culture that says it's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to not learn from them. And one of the things we want people to learn from their mistakes is it's okay to intervene.
Excellent. Jonathon, any last words before we cut to a totally different topic?
Yeah, I guess my last word is Abigail and I and our colleagues and the folks at New Orleans Police Department and the 420 agencies, we're really proud of this effort to help change culture in a way that's as good for police as community members. But interestingly, there are still, hundreds and hundreds of agencies that have not embraced this, and they're putting their officers at risk, um, and they're putting the public at risk. And we have to stop telling ourselves we shouldn't have to teach this, and we should just recognize that we do. So if anyone listening has a police department that's not in the program, send them a note. And by the way, I do this all pro bono, so I'm not advertising anything.
Excellent, excellent. That's great. And I'm going to ask my project manager, Ethan Mang, who is behind the scenes, if he wouldn't mind copying, if he could copy what you have put here in the chat, Abby, which is a lot more, if you want to learn more about Dr. Irvin Staub, to learn more about ABLE in general and heroes in general, but also the research on ABLE, I think would be really, really helpful. And so if you don't mind, Ethan, please post that also in the YouTube chat box so that students who are looking at it or in the archives later can access that. Thank you both so much for being with me tonight. You're welcome to stay on and listen to Chrissy if you like. We might come back later for just a shout out later on. But if you don't mind, thank you so much. And Chrissy, if you don't mind, can you please come on now? And we're going to talk a little bit about something, maybe same church, different pew, but certainly being the victim of sexual assault and the response of law enforcement and how that makes a difference in their lives and in their healing and in their transformation. So this is again Dr. Christina DePre. Chrissy, am I saying it right? I
It's
make
DePre.
I make you
fine.
French. DePre.
Yeah, it is. I
DePre.
think it is
Okay.
French. It's my husband's. It's fine.
Okay. All right. So I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. I always say it the same way, and I'm not sure if it was correct or not. But
No, it's
I
fine.
just want to say how proud I am of you and how far you've
Thanks.
come in your academic career. I was on your committee and was there when you defended and was there when you graduated. I think that we hooded you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Castro and I. And so really, really proud of you, really proud of your work. And without any further ado, please tell us a little bit about your research, how you came to it, and then maybe I might get a little bit into the nitty gritty of methodology and then of course findings.
Yeah, so first, before anything, I want to say Dr. Tucker just kind of like sparked something in me. She was saying to the police, like training the police, we're going to give you the skills that you don't have and the training that you were never taught. And that is kind of what I'm dealing with right now with my research. And my passion is because when we're talking about trauma, a lot of officers are not fully trained on what trauma is doing to the brain. And so when they are responding to calls, they are not fully equipped on how to handle the calls. And so I feel like that's a huge part of why the survivors are not being treated the way that they should be in some cases is really not because the officers are, being harsh to them for any reason other than they don't understand. But my research, so long story short, back many moons ago, I'm a survivor of sexual violence. And after healing and many years into my journey, I started working in the field. And so I was treated very well by the officers in my case, by the same nurses in my case. The detectives, the prosecution, my victim advocates, I had an amazing treatment. And so my perception of sexual assault cases was that this is how everyone's treated. But when I started to work in the field, I quickly learned that that's not the case. Like you said before, I have over 12 years experience. I've worked in, state attorney's office, sexual assault centers, responding to cases. And officers are not responding the way that they should be in many cases. And so my research really kind of focused on how that response triggered the survivor or what that caused afterwards. So an officer is responding and maybe asking re-victimizing questions, or body language is not showing support or belief in the survivor, and this is causing them to not get SANE exams, to not want to follow through with prosecution, to kind of just being like, you know what, never mind, I'm not even gonna continue. 50% of the survivors that I interviewed, I did 10, 50% thought about suicide after reporting due to the treatment and just how they felt. And 9 out of the 10 had a bad experience with law enforcement. So, I don't, and then I've also, working in the field, have spoken to law enforcement. And when I bring up trauma informed training, a lot of them are like, what do you mean? And so in the academy, they're getting online training. They're learning how to keep themselves alive, de-escalate situations, things like that. The trauma part of it is a very small part of their training. And so that's where I think the problem is that they're not really understanding how the trauma is affecting the brain. So maybe that's why the survivor's not hysterically crying. Maybe that's why the survivor is hysterically crying. Maybe that's why they can't remember their story. Maybe that's why their story has changed. And so then the bias comes in. Maybe maybe the officer thinks they're lying right away because maybe, there's just so many different facets that come with trauma. It's not a one size fits all. And so um, there needs to be more
Yes.
training.
Yeah, for sure. So like oftentimes we're curious about a particular problem that we want to examine because it's personally hit us. My dissertation was in domestic violence, and that was something that was close to home. And it made me curious. And maybe, I wonder why, or I wonder what. And like that's what happens with research. It's like, what is already known, and then, what do I think, and then what can I prove? So if you don't mind maybe talking a little bit about, like, so now you decided, this is what I'm super interested in, and this is the best design that would fit that, or meet that need of that particular question. Maybe talk to us a little bit about methodology and design, and then what was it like to actually do the study, and then we could get the third piece out, which is the most important, the results.
Yeah. So for me, when we were tasked, from day one in our PhD program, is what do you want to do research on? And that was a hard question for me at first, because I knew that this was something that this was going to be a huge, I was going to spend so much time on this. And so I wanted it to really be something that I was going to be passionate about, or that I cared a lot about. And so I thought about it a lot and came up with the idea to use my lived experience and to try to find a way to make something that I'm seeing in the field of criminal justice better in any way that I can do that. So I had spoken to my chair, which is Dr. Levy, and she explained phenomenology to me, which I researched phenomenology and how it was, and that seemed to be the best fit, because what I was trying to get to was lived experience from survivors. And in order to do that, I really needed to do that semi-structured interview with them to really get to know them and how this affected them. So I decided, phenomenology was the best bet with the structured interviews. And from there, I did that. That was a process, because I wanted to make sure that I was being sensitive to the subject. I did pre-interviews with the survivors, of course, letting them know I was going to be asking hard questions. Some of them said, no, this is too much, and we moved on to someone else. But a lot of them were willing to help, because a lot of them were like, no, this is a problem and this needs to be fixed in any way. So they were willing to just jump in. But yeah, so that's what I did. I did the qualitative structure, because I just really, numbers on a survey, to me, to really get to what we needed, the results, that wasn't going to work for this particular topic.
Yeah. And I love that you're saying that, because, I've always been an advocate of the quantitative, right? But that's only because I was familiar with it, and it was more, I was more comfortable with it. But what we know as researchers is that, you start with the research question, You do the literature review, which is what is already known, what has already been studied, and then you try to figure out what's the best fit for this. Like it's kind of like I want to go to New York. I could go by plane, I could go by car, I could walk, I guess, but and some students get like confused. And I know we have a lot of PhD students right now that are in this webinar listening, and sometimes where students misunderstand is that they say they start out with, I want to do a qualitative study. I'm like, well, what's your research question? Well, I don't know. Well, what's your population? I'm not sure. But you want to do a qualitative study? Like, I don't get it. What are you talking about? Because the method and the design are informed by the research questions in the literature, and where's the gap, and like you said, the population, like even cops and sexual assault survivors have so much in common, right? Because it's hard to get them to open up and to talk
Yep.
about it. And so qualitative is probably the way to get there. So tell us a little bit about, the number of participants, the data collection method. Like how did you go about doing that? Actually, how did you recruit them? How did you get that? Was it
Yes.
snowball sampling? What?
No, so I've been in, like you said earlier, I've been in the field for a long time, and so I really just used my connections within the community. So I created a flyer with a barcode on it, and then I sent it out to RAIN, and Violence Against Women International, Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. I sent it out to the victim service centers in Florida in my area, really just to kind of put it out there because, like I said, being a survivor myself. I now share my story and speak and have a voice, but a lot of people aren't at that stage yet, but maybe they want to or help out with the research confidentially. And so they put this flyer out, and that when they scanned the code, it brought them to a Excel sheet where they answered a few questions about the study, like are you a sexual assault survivor, and then they had to have reported to law enforcement because that was really what I needed, and they would answer yes or no, and then a couple more just housekeeping questions, and then their contact information. And so I think it was within a week and a half I had 50 participants on the Excel
Wow,
sheet. Yes,
that's
it
great.
it was a lot. And so I started from there, reaching out individually and saying, hey, can we set up a quick Zoom so I can explain the study in depth? Like I said, because I wanted to be very careful that I wasn't re-victimizing anyone, that they met the qualifications, that they understood the questions that they were going to be answering. And so I did pre-interviews. And then from there, once they agreed, yes, I want to do all of that, they would sign the consent form. And then, of course, through how the IRB, we had to go through the IRB, and I had to submit all of my interview questions, just to make sure that I was, doing everything correctly. And from there, it was probably about an hour to an hour and a half each interview. And I recorded each one. And so I would get the transcripts. And then from each interview, I would go through the transcripts after and just look for those themes. And from there, um, I was able to pull out the themes and see the patterns of just not being believed, negative treatment, need for training, a lot of need for training. I think every participant that I interviewed said at the end, I asked if you could speak to the law enforcement officer that you encounter or had the encounter with today, what would you say? And they said, I wish that you would have just treated me like a person and believed me. And then I asked them, what recommendations do you think could help officers in this case? And every one of them said more training on trauma.
Excellent, excellent. And so, lessons learned from the research, and what your next steps are.
So actually, I met with a legislator like 2 weeks ago discussing my dissertation. And so I've been looking into some different laws. I think it was 2 years ago, a law in Florida was just passed that now every officer within a year had to take this trauma informed training course. The
Excellent.
course it's online and it's 2 hours. Great start. I took the course. You can click through it. It's very generic. So I did meet with a legislator who agrees that we need more in-person mandated trauma-informed specific care training for law enforcement. And so I am working on setting up a pilot program right now, with some different police agencies to try and do that, because of course funding is an issue. I knew that would be a barrier. I mentioned that in my dissertation. Pulling and the other thing is, there is trauma-informed training right now, but the detectives are getting that training, and it's the patrol that needs it. And so that's a barrier, because a lot of departments are saying we can't pull patrol off the street to send them to this training for a week. We don't have enough officers, etc. So that's my plan. Lessons learned. I'm trying. I do, based on my research, also personal experience in the field. I have my story alone. Like, I got a prosecution of 50 years. I still talk to my victim advocate today, even though my case was 24 years ago. I know that it can be done right, and I know that people can heal. Um, I've seen it in the field, and I've seen good, and I've seen bad. So
Excellent. Excellent. Well, look, I thank you so much for sharing your research with us and how it makes a difference. And like every single dissertation that I ever, and any defense that I'm ever there for, I always will say, my question will always be, so what? So what? So how does this, or how do these findings inform policy and practice? And you just now hit a home run, because if you're able to actually speak to policymakers and make a difference,
mhm.
and change things, that's the key. And I think that all three of our guests tonight are really making some significant changes and really doing such amazing work. So thank you again for being here. We've got a couple of questions from the audience that I'd like to maybe I'll hit you first, Chrissy. This attendee is directing this question to you.
Hmm.
As a male survivor of child sexual abuse, I'm curious as to what training or programs are given to law enforcement agencies to work with male sexual abuse victims that encourages reporting.
Yeah, so I can't speak to what training law enforcement gets, because that's not my area of expertise on that specific subject. But I do know that they get overall training in like I said, the 2-hour training, some training on trauma informed care, and then like how to report. And I know child abuse cases are handled very differently than adult cases. They do get there's special teams that come in, and the Child Advocacy Center usually handles that when it's children. So I can't speak to that, because I don't really know for sure. But I do know that it's needed.
Yeah, and I
It's
know like in
definitely.
Florida, like FDLE has a standardized curriculum, right? I know I can
Yep.
only speak from my personal experience in NYPD, teaching at the police academy. At the entry level, we mentioned it was an honorable mention. So it wasn't like here's the specific ways that you can get male sexual assault survivors to report. In the same way, male domestic violence survivors also, whether it be same sex or female on male battering. We know that these things exist. We know that that phenomenon is true. So,
Mhm.
is there specific law enforcement training around it? I think it's probably mentioned, but probably there's always a need for a deeper dive in that area, I would say. I got another one for you, Chrissy. So this is from Delilah La Pietra, who is also a PhD student. And she says, did you share your personal experience with your interviewees? And she says she apologizes if she missed you mentioning that.
So I did not. Um, I made my interview very clear and focused about them. The only reason that I did not share, because the interview wasn't about me. I wanted them to feel heard and believed, and I really was very careful to make sure that I didn't re-victimize. And my story. It wasn't the right place for me to share my story with them, unless they asked a certain question, or like, do you know how this feels, or then I would say, yeah, I do know. But no, that was a space for them to share their story, have their voice, and it was really about them.
Great. Excellent. Now, I'm going to ask, well, Chrissy, I'm going to give you an opportunity. Any last words about your research and about next steps? Anything else that you wanted to just say
No,
before we
just
go?
yeah, just that I loved doing this research. It sparked something in me, and I'm so sad that I graduated because I want to do more research. And so I'm just looking for ways to get involved in more research because there's so much to research when it comes to this area. Um, and so yeah, that's
Well,
it.
Dr. Tucker is asking if you're on LinkedIn,
I
she'd love
am
to tag you, she said. So,
absolutely.
Dr. Tucker, speaking of Dr. Tucker and Jonathan, can you come back? I got some questions here from the audience that I'd like to just kind of run by you, all right, if you don't mind.
We don't
So,
mind. We've been busy like answering two in the system, which is pretty cool, by the way.
I know, I saw that. I saw that. That's great. So, I've got a question here from YouTube. It's another one of our PhD students, Alex. Alex asks, how would you guys, and I'm assuming that it's you guys, guys being Jonathan and Abby, how would you guys feel about integrating some active bystander training into civilian jobs? Since a lot of civilians also have active shooter training, wouldn't it be beneficial?
Oh, I'm going to say one thing and then I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
Okay.
The social science behind active bystandership is human science. ABLE was just a platform to bring it to law enforcement. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, as we speak, Grace, I'm actually implementing an active bystandership program in a Fortune 50 $15 billion company because they have realized that they can prevent so many mistakes, so many costly errors, so much health and wellness issues if they, get this, learn from policing. We don't hear that much in the world these days. And yet here we have a very proud moment where corporate world can learn from something that we're now seeing in policing. Also, and this is going to be published very soon, but the gentleman who runs the Utah State and Local Trust, it's an insurance pool. He and I did some research on his claims data, and and Abigail's read the report. It is clear beyond a doubt that municipalities would benefit from active bystandership training in every aspect of what they do. Like I wish I remembered the number, but we identified a huge number of claims paid by the insurance pool that there was a bystander, another municipal employee present who in theory could have prevented the harm. And so, yeah, short answer, Grace, is I don't know why everyone wouldn't do this. But you got to do it for real. It can't be window
Yes.
dressing. It can't just be a poster.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, since like all three of you really are talking about, kind of reimagining police response, reimagining police accountability, all of that. So, and how important it is. It's not just about doing a good job. It's about really making a difference in people's lives, real people. But, the thing is that, law enforcement, we're real people too. We're not recruited from another planet, right? So we're human too. And we're in the human service industry, right? And I love Jonathan I liked you the minute that I met you 2 seconds, into it. But I really loved how you said this is not just indicative, like active bystandership piece. It's not just for law enforcement. It's for, I love that you said clergy, the medical profession, right?
Well, so what's interesting there, so you're so God, we should talk an hour about this, but
Yes,
what's interesting is the medical profession, they adopted this years ago, and their numbers of unforced errors fell dramatically. Pilots adopted it years ago, and their unforced errors fell dramatically.
yeah.
It was interesting. Policing and corporate America were two of the holdouts.
Yeah, interesting. And Abby, I love that you just now put physicians are still responsible for more deaths than law enforcement every year, due to medical errors. And so, yeah, thank you for that, saying that. I don't know, I get defensive. I shouldn't. I'm 65 years old. I shouldn't. I should be like immune to this already.
But
But
I
look,
think it's important to be defensive of any group that's being outed as being terrible when actually it applies to all of us as human beings. Like
yeah,
that
Right.
actually is helpful to
Absolutely.
call out that when we stop othering and siloing and us versus them and you're the worst, no, you're the worst.
yes,
Active bystandership allows us to elevate the waters for all, right? And
yes.
so I actually think that I'll take your defensiveness as a helpful tool in this.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And
Ditto.
Chrissy, I also really I loved that your response to one of our students' question was that you really wanted your participant's voice to be heard and not to be clouded with your experience. And that's like so ethical in terms of research because we try to limit our bias and we all have it no matter what. So I really appreciate that you said that. Okay, so this question is really any one of you could answer it. It's the last question. In the aspect of mistakes, what is the culture that you've experienced in officers owning their mistakes and making a change? Anybody? All right, one at a time.
I I can start from New Orleans if you want.
Okay.
Because so I've had the privilege of watching New Orleans change, right? I became federal monitor in 2013, and my monitorship will be over next month. And one of the key changes I've seen over that time is an institutional willingness to fess up to mistakes, commit to corrections, and then follow up on corrections. And and as the institution has gotten better doing that, officers themselves have gotten better doing it. But the only way that works is if you create a culture where you don't punish people for good faith mistakes. Like that this is where so much accountability goes awry. Everyone jumps all over. We should punish officers for this, that, and the other thing. There's no other profession in the world where you get punished so much for a good faith error. And we pay the price for that. And so I think Grace, it goes hand in hand, right? If we want people to fess up to their errors, learn from them and build upon them, then we have to stop over punishing for basic human mistakes.
I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So tonight's conversation underscores a powerful truth about transforming policing and strengthening justice. And we learned about active bystandership and how it's reshaping modern policing, empowering officers to intervene and protect one another and build trust with the communities they serve. And we examined the profound impact that law enforcement response has on sexual assault survivors. I used to say that to my recruits all the time. You will make a difference in that victim's life for the rest of his or her life. So, our responsibility as criminal justice professionals is to approach these moments with trauma informed care, with dignity, and with compassion. So, special thank you to Jonathon, Aroni, to Dr. Chrissy DePre, and Dr. Abigail Tucker, who I am just, I'm enamored with. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. I really appreciate you and hope that we can see you again soon. Thank you for being with
Thank
me
you.
tonight.
This was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. So I'm just going to do a little shameless plug about what's next. So we've finished out October now, and we're already rushing into November with daylight savings time, if you could believe that, happening already, which is hard to believe that that's already here. And we're already like marching into winter, it looks like. And let me just tell you what we have on tap for November. So my lineup is as follows. November 6th, Tracing the Vanished. It's an empirical study of missing persons with our very own Ed Densel from Unfound. I'm really excited and looking forward to that particular episode. He's coming from an empirical perspective, and I love it. So I can't wait to hear about that. November 13th, Silent Wounds. And this is an empirical study of PTSD among veterans, with my guest being Dr. Dana Mills and also Matt Chenoweth. And Matt is from the Veterans Resource Center at NSU. And then finally, to close out the season, the semester, if you will, November 20th, use of sociodrama to address oral health treatment of children with special health care needs. And that's with our very own Dr. Maria Levy-Mincy and Dr. Christina Godoy from the College of Dental Medicine. Thank you to my dean, to Dr. Durham, to all of the deans and everyone who supports all of the programming. Thank you to my students who decided that they would come tonight, and I really appreciate that. And also thank you, Ethan, for being behind the scenes. Have a good night, everybody.